Today, we're going to talk about Trump's $355 million fraud verdict and its impact on November. And I've got two interviews. I speak with Congressman Jared Moskowitz about Republican star whistleblower getting indicted by the DOJ for making false statements and the likelihood of Ukraine aid getting passed by this Congress. And I'm joined by attorney Tristan Snell to discuss his successful litigation against Donald Trump and, based on his own experience against him, what he thinks the likelihood of Trump being successfully prosecuted in his upcoming trials is. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen, and you're watching No Lie. Who would have guessed that Trump would probably yearn for the days when he only had to come up with $83 million? He was just hit with a jaw-dropping $355 million verdict for business fraud in New York, which jumps to $455 million when you add in prejudgment interest, as well as a 3-year ban on serving as an officer in any New York business. His kids, Don Jr. and Eric, were also hit with $4 million fines. And a court-appointed independent monitor will remain at the Trump Organization to pore over every detail of the company's machinations to make sure that nothing fraudulent or illegal takes place. That's also the part that reporting suggests pisses Trump off the most. I wonder why. And I know that we're all tired and cynical and looking at this thing and thinking, cool, but it's not going to have any impact on Trump. Two reasons why I think it absolutely will. The first is a point I made after the E. Jean Carroll ruling. Donald Trump's air of invincibility is gone. Think back to the days before he was indicted. No one ever thought that it would happen. No one ever thought that a prosecutor would actually step up and do it. And then it happened in Manhattan, and the dam broke, and then immediately thereafter, it happened in Florida, and then D.C., and then Georgia. And then we figured, okay, well, he was charged, but he'll never lose a case. And then, of course, he lost his first civil case against E. Jean Carroll for $5 million. He lost his second civil case against E. Jean Carroll for $83 million. And he lost his third case, this civil case in New York, for $355 million. So I get that his branding suggests that he's Teflon Don, but the guy is a loser. He loses more than literally anybody I've seen in my entire life. He's out over $500 million in just the last month, which is to say nothing of the fact that since he's been on the political scene, he's been responsible for massive losses in 2018, 2020, 2022, and 2023. And by the way, it's worth noting, Donald Trump wants you to feel like he'll never be held accountable so that we'll give up, that we won't even try. He wants us to feel helpless so that he's not challenged. But he shed that branding now, and in the same way that he's lost in the court, he will keep losing in court, and he'll lose at the ballot box. And the second point to remember is that most people aren't paying attention to politics right now. But as we get closer to November, they will. And you got to realize that most people aren't going to be inclined to vote for a proven fraud, a con man, a rapist, and soon a convicted felon. So I know that it doesn't feel like that because, these diehard Trump supporters are so overrepresented in the media that you can't turn on TV without seeing some feature story about a person with a MAGA tattoo on their face in a diner somewhere, but that's not the majority of people. It's just the result of a both sides media that is desperate to lavish coverage onto these people so that they don't get accused of being liberal. And by the way, just on that point of voters defecting away from Trump, the polling bears that out. After the Iowa caucus, a poll asked voters if convicted would Trump be fit to serve as president. 31% said no. That is 31% of Iowa Republican caucus goers, the most engaged, the most likely to be in the tank for Trump, instead saying that him being convicted would be disqualifying. In New Hampshire, voters were asked the same question. 42% said no. Trump wouldn't be fit to be president if convicted. And look, not that I can predict the future here, but the dude is contending with 91 criminal charges in 4 different jurisdictions. He's going to be convicted. He's already lost every case thus far. And even if half of those 31% of voters in Iowa or 42% of voters in New Hampshire defects back to Trump, that would still leave a massive exodus of Republican voters who would view Donald Trump as unfit to serve. And of course, look, a number of those Republicans are going to come home to Trump if he becomes the eventual nominee. But regardless, these are not small amounts of people who are saying that being a convicted felon is a red line for them. Trump doesn't have the luxury of being able to relinquish massive swaths of voters, much less his own base. The guy lost by 8 million votes in 2020. The last thing he should be doing right now is alienating his own party. The fact is that this ruling in New York gives voters an important point to consider ahead of November. Do you really trust someone who's not even legally allowed to operate a business in New York to be able to run the entire country? Do you really trust the same guy who defrauded the city of New York to line his own pockets to protect you? Do you really trust someone who was found liable for rape to protect women and their reproductive care? To protect seniors, to protect kids? He will plow through us like he's plowed through everyone his entire life if it meant that he could make another buck. And just like he's always done, he will say anything and do anything to protect himself right now. Here are previews of my interviews with Jared Moskowitz and Tristan Snell. James Comer, speaking of, he basically predicated this whole Biden impeachment effort on whistleblower testimony from guys like Alexander Smirnov, who was just arrested and charged with making false statements about Joe and Hunter Biden. What's left of the impeachment effort at this point?
Well, I mean, first of all, thoughts and prayers to James Comer and his impeachment inquiry, because it is done. It is finished. They should end it. They should go get a shovel, bury it in the backyard. Because this was the birth, the 1023 form. Remember all the yelling about the 1023 form, the 1023 form. We had to go into a skiff and view the 1023 form. Well, the guy who put all that information into the 1023 form was indicted. Why was he indicted? Because he was indicted because he made it all up. All of it. It's all a lie. The $5 million payment to Joe Biden, the Bidens. Remember, we heard this for months. All a lie. And look, James is 2-0. 2-0. This is his second informant who has been indicted for lying. Let's not forget the Chinese foreign agent who was selling Iranian oil and arms to the Libyans, also was indicted several months ago for lying as well. And so, yes, this has been a lie. Don't get me wrong, Hunter Biden has gotten himself into some trouble that he's going to have to deal with. But that has nothing to do with this entire scope about Joe Biden. It is over.
Well, look, if the point of all of this was always just perpetuating a narrative by any means necessary, regardless of any of the facts, why would this actually stop them from barreling forward? Like, it's not like they were...
they're going to.
It's not like Ryan, they were chastened by the lack of evidence before, so what would be different now?
Because here's the deal. They're never going to impeach Joe. That's the key. They're never going to call for a vote to impeach him. First, there's no evidence. Second, they don't have the votes. They don't have the votes to impeach the president. How do we know that? That's why they kind of stopped talking about it for a little bit, right? And they pivoted to Mayorkas, right, which they were only able to accomplish by one vote on the day of the election in New York. Now they don't have the votes in the House to impeach Mayorkas, by the way. Guess what? That impeachment is also a waste of time. He's still the Secretary of Homeland Security. The Senate is not going to remove him. He also committed no treason or high crime and misdemeanor, so they didn't do this in conjunction with the Constitution. So, Mayorkas will have to change his Wikipedia page. That's going to be the only thing that'll get accomplished. But they stopped talking about Joe Biden for a while. That's interesting. Did they know? And this is the real question, Brian. How long has James Comer known that Alexander Smirnov, insert alcoholic joke here, how long did he know, Comer, what Smirnov said or what was in that form was false? How long did he know that maybe Smirnov was being investigated, perhaps? How long did he know? And depending on how long he has known, why did he conceal that? He owes that not just to the members of the committee, he owes that to the members of the House, and Comer owes that to the members of the American public who, for a year now, he has gone in front of to talk about this 1023 form.
Last time I'd asked you if you had a message for James Comer in light of what we thought then would be the end of this whole mangled impeachment effort, and that was quite entertaining. So I wonder if, in light of this latest, death knell to this impeachment inquiry, if you have another message for James Comer, given that he watches this show religiously.
Well, I mean, look, James, if you're listening, it's over, baby. It is so over. Oh my God, it is beyond over, my friend. Come on, listen to your dear friend here. I have only the best. I'm only looking out for you. Okay. I know you stopped having oversight hearings because, you didn't want to hear from me or from Raskin or from, trust fund Goldman, like you like to call him. But, look, you're friendly Smurf. I wore blue for you, James, today. If you're listening to me, it is way over. And so, but look, if he wants to continue to embarrass himself, Brian, he'll continue. We just got notice that they're bringing special counsel Hur to the floor to Congress in March. Guess what? He's not coming to oversight. He's going to judiciary. I wonder.
So that Jim Jordan
they
can
take that away from James Comer? Probably they did. Some people are saying.
So, Tristan, you beat Trump in court over his fraud that was Trump University. Based on your experience in that case, knowing what it took for him to lose, what do you think the outlook is for his pending prosecutions in D.C. and Florida and Manhattan and Fulton County?
Well, let's see. As I say in the book, Even John Gotti wasn't able to make it through 4 criminal trials without finally getting convicted. He famously got away with the first 3, and it was the 4th one that brought him down. So I think that Donald Trump's chances of escaping from this unscathed are low, quite low. Now, the question in my mind is not really if, but it's a when. This is about the timing and then how that relates to the election. If Trump were just now a private citizen and then we're sort of curious as to when he was eventually going to get imprisoned, it would be clear that it's like, look, it's going to happen at some point in the next year. But given the presidential calendar schedule, that's a totally different ballgame. That said, like, what does it take to bring him down, and what are these cases doing to do that right or less right, et cetera, et cetera? And how does that relate to Trump's efforts with his own playbook? The DC case, I think, is probably the most dangerous for him all the way around. It was done as a very tight case. They're trying to get it done as fast as possible. They didn't overcharge him. They've been stoic and not responding to any of Trump's, counterattacks. They've been dealing with his attempts to delay it, trying to move that immunity issue through the courts as fast as possible. So I think they've really been applying the lessons on that a good bit. I think we shouldn't sleep on the Manhattan case. It doesn't have the same gravity, but I do believe that there's a lot there. And I think that one's probably going to ultimately, the big question will be on appeal regarding whether or not I think he's going to get convicted. The question is going to be, is it for a felony or misdemeanor? And that will probably end up being decided on appeal. The Mar-a-Lago case, good grief, your guess is as good as mine. And Fulton County, I can talk about that one more too, but I think the kicker there is they just went with a different path. They charged a whole lot of counts and a whole lot of defendants. They're getting people to flip, which is good in its own way. But on the other hand, it just means it's a big, clunky case that's taking forever. The reason why that case is moving slower is not because of the stuff with Fonnie Willis, which is a classic Trump counterattack, but because there were 19 defendants. There's all the dozens of counts. One of the first things the judge said when that went up for a hearing was he wasn't sure there was a courtroom in Atlanta big enough to hold the case.
Yeah.
So that's what's going on with that one.
Well, at the end of this whole process, we may not need a courtroom that big, considering how many people have flipped thus far and who are likely to flip.
That's
moving
true.
forward.
That's a good point.
Talk about real quick this idea of not overcharging in the DC case, because I think a lot of people look at this and say, why didn't he get charged for insurrection, for example? But what are the merits of not overcharging? Why does this redound ultimately to prosecutors' benefit?
It's a matter of speed, and I think they have been looking to do this. The bigger the case, the more possibilities there are for issues to be brought, motions to be brought. The discovery, which is when the prosecution then has to hand over all of its evidence to the defense prior to trial, that would be more voluminous. And then it's just a matter of sticking a more complicated case in front of a jury. The bigger the story that you've got to tell to a jury with more counts and more claims and more defendants, the more they've got to actually keep track of. And it's a lot. It's a lot for any of us. It's a lot for those of us who cover this stuff for a living. It's a lot to keep track of when you have a case like Atlanta. So the DC case, I feel like they stayed true to the things that are going to be the easiest to prove. And we have to remember that it's less about the violence of January 6th and the inciting of that violence. And it's more about the palace coup, the bureaucratic part of J6. And it's less sexy to talk about, but I think it's going to be the thing that brings him down. It's the fake electors. It's pressuring Pence. It was trying to hijack DOJ. And then it was the bureaucracy of the fact that they sought to and successfully delayed the certification of the Electoral College vote that day. Constitution requires it to be done on the 6th of January. And it actually wasn't. It didn't happen until the next morning.
Yeah.
So I think those things which are drier to talk about, people have asked, like, oh, when are we going to find out about the Proud Boys? When are we going to find out about the Oath Keepers? It's like, and the role that Trump or Roger Stone or somebody played in all of that. It's like, maybe we're going to get more indictments about that later, but not in this case. They designed this case to be a torpedo, not a armada.
To watch the full interviews with Jared Moskowitz and Tristan Snell, click the thumbnails right here on the screen or check out the interviews playlist on my YouTube channel. You can also listen to the audio version of this episode by clicking that link on the screen, and of course to see more of my content, the subscribe button's on the screen as well.